Okay, so get ready to dive into a world of luxury, a world most of us can only dream of, really. Imagine, just picture stepping back in time to the Titanic's very last night, and specifically, let's go inside the first-class dining saloon. This wasn't just grabbing a bite to eat, this was an experience. It was designed to transport you to a completely different world, a world of like pure Edwardian elegance. And we're going to use this super interesting article, The Lost Dining Room of the Titanic, Edwardian Luxury's Last Supper, to kind of be our guide today.
What I think is just amazing is how much effort really went into creating this whole atmosphere of just like over-the-top opulence. Just picture it, a room so grand, so huge that it could fit, get this, over 500 passengers. That's
Okay.
spanning the entire width of the ship.
Wait, over 500 people? Wow. Okay, I can barely even handle like a dinner party with 10 people without having a total meltdown. That really puts the scale of the Titanic, the sheer size of it, into a whole new perspective. It really was practically a floating city. But what I think is really interesting is this idea of the dining saloon itself being like a statement, like it's trying to tell you something.
Yeah.
So if we were lucky enough to like step inside this amazing room, what's the first thing that would just totally blow us away?
Well, I mean, definitely be hit by the sheer size of the room first, obviously. But then your eyes would be drawn almost immediately upward to these elegant white pillars. And these pillars, they reach towards this magnificent dome, this centerpiece. And, think about it. They're more than just holding up the ceiling, right? These were architectural statements, like they're echoing the grandeur of palaces and these incredible cathedrals. The Edwardian era was all about making a statement, and this room just screamed opulence. It's like those incredible old libraries or, those grand museums where the building itself is like a work of art. It's designed to like inspire awe, but also maybe a little bit of intimidation at the same time. The article also mentions these huge windows lining the walls. Can you imagine like enjoying your breakfast, your coffee, bathed in this beautiful sunlight, streaming across the Atlantic Ocean? So cool. Absolutely. Light plays such an important role in how we experience a space. And those windows, all that natural light, it would have created this incredible sense of openness, connecting the diners to like the vastness of the ocean, this huge thing right outside.
Wow.
And, that's a stark contrast to the cramped, almost claustrophobic, spaces that were found in the lower classes on the ship.
Yeah.
Even something as simple as natural light, sunlight, it became a luxury on the Titanic, something just for the elite. And it's subtly saying something about the social hierarchy on board.
Yeah, it's like a good reminder that every single detail on that ship, even something as like simple as where they put the windows, was meticulously planned out. And speaking of details, there's this one in the article that I was not expecting at all. It mentions green Moroccan leather chairs. For some reason, I always pictured the dining room, like the whole thing, decked out in reds and golds, like those really opulent, rich colors. But green, that's so interesting. That's different.
Right. It is, and it really highlights how the designers of this room, they weren't afraid to play with elements you wouldn't expect. Those green chairs, they wouldn't just add a splash of color to the room. They would add a really unique texture, and they would break up the potential monotony of all that gold. It's those little details that really elevate a room from simply being opulent to being truly sophisticated. Every element, starting with the architecture, down to the furniture, the choices they made, was also deliberate, all to create this atmosphere of luxury, this immersive experience.
Wow, you've really painted quite a picture of this grand space. But, at the end of the day, a dining room is more than just how it looks, right? It's about the experience of dining, of eating in that space. So let's shift gears a bit. From the visual feast to the actual food. I mean, I've definitely had my fair share of fancy meals in my life, but I have a feeling that things were a tad different back in the Edwardian era.
Oh, absolutely. The article really highlights how, for the Edwardians, dining was something else entirely. It was this elaborate ritual, an art form, meticulously designed, and it wasn't just about the food, it was about status, about showing off your place in society.
So we've talked about how incredible and opulent the Titanic's dining saloon was and how it would make you feel like royalty. But okay, let's get to what I really want to talk about. The food. Now, I've definitely eaten at some fancy places, but I have to imagine, like, back in the Edwardian era, they did things a little differently, right? But
Oh, for sure. Like, the article really highlights how seriously the Edwardians took their dining experiences. This wasn't just about eating. It was like this whole performance, this whole thing. Every little detail, like even where your fork was placed or how the food was brought out to you, it was all planned out meticulously. And it all kind of played into this idea of social hierarchy and how refined you were.
it's so interesting how something as simple as a meal could be about so much more, Speaking of which, the article says that each place setting at the table had Get this. 12 pieces of silverware. 12. I can't even use a regular fork without dropping it on myself. Can you even imagine trying to figure out all those forks and spoons, especially if you'd never, like, eaten like that before?
Yeah. It really would be like some kind of secret code that you had to crack.
Yeah.
And in that setting, in front of all those people, you really wouldn't want to mess up. We have to remember, for these first-class passengers, knowing the proper etiquette, that was everything. It wasn't just about enjoying the food. It was about showing everyone that you knew all the rules, all these really specific social rules. It proved you belonged there in that elite group of people.
Oh, yeah. Talk about pressure. I would be so nervous. I bet even, like, the fanciest, richest people there were still a little stressed about using the right fork.
Okay, but it wasn't just the silverware. The article also talks about, like, the dishes and glasses themselves. It mentions fine bone, china, and crystal glassware. Yeah, and those weren't just dishes and glasses. They were basically status symbols.
Mm.
Each piece was chosen specifically because of how beautiful it was, how well made it was. It was like they were saying something about faraway places, whispering about exquisite taste. Just imagine, like, sipping some fancy wine from one of those delicate crystal glasses. And it's etched with all these intricate designs, and the light catches them, like, just so... And the ship is moving gently beneath you. It's like those details just add this whole other layer to the experience, to the dining.
You're totally right. They really did think of everything to create this luxurious atmosphere, this whole experience. Okay, so we've talked about the room itself, the etiquette, the dishes. Now, come on, let's talk about the actual food. What were some of the amazing dishes they would had at the Titanic's last meal?
Well, if you look back at menus from that time, that night, it was a really big meal, 11 courses, and they were all amazing examples of the best Edwardian cuisine. We're talking oysters, filet mignon, roast duckling, poached salmon with mousseline sauce, all these really fancy dishes, each one more decadent and delicious than the last.
Okay, stop. You had me at oysters. I can only imagine how good everything smelled, all those flavors and aromas throughout the dining room. It must have been incredible. And I know this might sound kind of obvious, but it wasn't just about using rich and exotic ingredients, was it? They were really pushing culinary boundaries in terms of how the food was prepared, right?
Exactly. Think about the oysters, even just as one example. They wouldn't just like open them up and serve them. There would be all these other elements, delicate little sauces, maybe a mignonette, finally chopped shallots, even a little champagne, who knows? It was all about making these simple ingredients into something even more special, something elevated.
Oh my gosh, it all sounds so good. I'm like getting hungry just thinking about it. And to think that was just one course out of 11. It's pretty easy to get caught up in how glamorous and opulent everything was. But then I remember this was the last meal. And that's what the article calls it too, a bittersweet legacy. It's
Yeah.
amazing to think about that 11-course meal and all the details, but the article calls it a bittersweet legacy for a reason, right? I mean, it was super luxurious and glamorous, but the whole time you know what's coming.
Yeah, and that contrast, that feeling,
Yeah.
is part of what makes this last dinner on the Titanic so interesting, even haunting a little. Think about it. Hundreds of people, all dressed up, the best clothes, drinking champagne, the best food, the best of everything. Everyone's talking and laughing, glasses clinking, and it's like this perfect moment, this perfect scene. But it's all happening, like right before this huge tragedy.
It's like watching a movie and you already know how it ends. It's awful, but you can't look away. That's what gets me, that dramatic irony. All those people, they went to bed with full stomachs, excited about America, and they had no idea. It makes you think about how fragile life is, how things can change so fast.
Totally. The Titanic, especially this last meal, it reminds us that just because you have money, luxury, it doesn't mean anything when something like that happens. The article also talks about how when the Titanic sank, it was like the end of an era, like literally the end of the Edwardian period and the end of that kind of opulence, that lifestyle.
And that's so interesting because when I think of the Edwardian era, that's exactly what I picture, all that wealth and also this feeling that everything was good, that they were making so much progress. But then the Titanic sinks and it happens right at the end, so it feels symbolic, like it's foreshadowing everything that's about to change. World War I, all of that.
For sure. The unsinkable ship going down, it was like this huge crack and this idea that everything was fine. This idea that defined the Edwardian period. It showed everyone the limits of technology, of what humans could do. Like it made way for a new way of thinking, a new era where all those old rules, all that certainty, it was gone.
Wow. It's crazy how even a meal can be this big, important thing, like how it makes us think about a whole time period in history. But I'm glad the article ends on a more positive note, talking about how we can still have some of that elegance, that Titanic style in our own homes.
Exactly. I mean, I don't think anyone's building a replica dining room. That would be a little much. It's about capturing the feeling, what made Edwardian style so great.
Yeah, like how to make our homes feel a little more elegant and sophisticated, but in a modern way.
The article talks about using these rich colors and textures, especially jewel tones, emerald green, ruby red, all of that. I'm kind of feeling inspired to redecorate.
Me too. And don't forget those ornate details. We don't need those huge pillars or like stained glass, but even just a really cool mirror, a vintage looking chandelier, or some furniture that looks antique that can really work.
It's about those little touches.
Actually, you know what? Forget the decorating. I'm going to have a dinner party. Now, it will probably be like 3 courses, maybe 4 max, not 11. I'm not trying to go crazy, and my friends can only eat so much. But I love the idea of a real sit-down dinner, taking your time with each course and having good conversations.
Exactly. It's about slowing down, appreciating a good meal, and the company, too.
This whole conversation has given me so much to think about. It's not even just about the Titanic or how glamorous things were back then. It's about appreciating the good moments, even when we know bad things can happen, because life goes on, right? And I kind of feel like sometimes looking back at the past actually helps us appreciate the present more.
That's a great point. And we never really know what will happen, just like those passengers on the Titanic. So we should enjoy the moment, appreciate those little things, like just having dinner with people we care about.
Such a good point. And this whole time I've been wondering, if we were on the Titanic at that dinner, surrounded by all that amazing stuff, would we actually appreciate it, be in the moment? Or would we feel like something was off? I don't know. It's something I'll definitely be thinking about.